Myoho Renge Kyo Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Oh. Okay, sorry about the vibration there. Amo Myoho Renge Kyo. Let's continue with the opening of the eyes. A very meaty go-show. While the Buddha was still alive, there would have been good reasons for choosing the Lotus Sutra. But in the ages since his passing, the teachers and scholars have, in most cases, shown a preference for the earlier sutras. Not only is the Lotus Sutra itself difficult to believe, but in addition, with the coming of the latter age, sages and worthies gradually disappear from the scene, and deluded people increase in number. People are prone to make mistakes even in shallow worldly affairs. So how much more likely are they to be mistaken about the profound Buddhist teachings that lead to enlightenment? Vatsa and Vaipulya were keen and perceptive, but still they confused the Hinayana and Mahayana sutras. Vimalamitra and Madhava were very clever by nature, but they could not distinguish properly between the provisional teachings and the true teachings. These men lived during the 1,000-year period known as the former day of the law, not far removed in time from the Buddha himself, and in the same country of India, and yet they fell into error, as we have seen. How much more likely, therefore, that the people of China and Japan should do so, since these countries are far removed from India and speak different languages from it. Now human beings have grown increasingly dull by nature. Their lifespan diminishes steadily, and the poisons of greed, anger, and foolishness continue to multiply. Amazing how current this all feels. Many ages have passed since the Buddha's demise, and the Buddhist scriptures are all misunderstood. Who these days has the wisdom to interpret them correctly? Therefore, the Buddha predicted in the Nirvana Sutra that in the latter day of the law, those who abide by the correct teaching will be as few as the specks of dirt that can be placed on a fingernail, while those who slander the correct teachings will be as numerous as the specks of dirt in all the lands of the 10 directions. Wow. We see great evidence of this today, don't we? In the Decline of the Law Sutra, we find a passage stating that those who slander the correct teaching will be as numerous as the sands of the Ganges, but those who abide by the correct teaching will be no more than 1 or 2 pebbles. Though 500 or 1,000 years go by, it will be difficult to find even a single person who believes in the correct teaching. Those who fall into the evil paths because of secular crimes will be as insignificant in number as the specks of dirt placed on a fingernail, but those who do so because of violations of Buddhist teachings will be equal in number to the specks of dirt in all the lands of the 10 directions. More monks than laymen and more nuns than laywomen will fall into the evil paths. I have to pause here just to remind you all how much I'm a huge proponent of self-teaching. That's who our true teachers are, ourselves, our minds. We need to awaken our own minds. Nichiren, Shakyamuni, Nagarjuna, Tendai, Dengyo, they've all given us the tools, but we must till the soil of our minds. Here Nichiren considers as follows. Already over 200 years have passed since the world entered the latter day of the law. I was born in a remote land, and moreover I am a person of low station and a priest of humble learning. While being born again and again amid the six paths, I have perhaps at times been born as a great ruler in the human heavenly world, and have bent the multitudes to my will as a great mind bends the branches of small trees. And yet at such times I was not able to become a Buddha. I studied the Hinayana and Mahayana sutras beginning as an ordinary practitioner who with no understanding at all, and gradually moving upward to the position of great bodhisattva. Okay, so here it is. Nichiren talking about himself as a bodhisattva. But don't misunderstand these previous existences as other lifetimes. Once again, this is a translation, so be careful when you read this that you're mindful of him describing his path toward becoming a bodhisattva in his own lifetime. We know that he was born a fisherman's son. We know that when he was 11 or 12, they decided to let him leave home and pursue the monk life, the student life, and that he traveled broadly. And obviously, as he traveled, he gained merit, and he gained learning, and he used that learning. He was a skilled debater, so he must have also been a teacher. So he's talking about all these iterations in his path toward bodhisattva, just as we all do. So, back to it. For one kalpa, two kalpas, countless kalpas, I devoted myself to the practices of bodhisattva until I almost reached the stage of non-regression, and yet I was dragged down by the powerful and overwhelming influences of evil, and I never attained Buddhahood. I do not know whether I am among the third group who failed to take resolute mind of determination when the sons of great universal wisdom, excellence Buddha, preached the Lotus Sutra, and again failed to attain Buddhahood during the lifetime of Shakyamuni Buddha, or whether I faltered and fell away from the teachings that I heard numberless numberless major world systems dust particle kalpas ago, and thus have been reborn in this age. How many of you remember with absolute accuracy everything that you did when you were 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, 10 years old? Numerous kalpas ago. I'm going to continue to correct your perception on this because the language here is ancient and it can be very misleading to a modern mind. Don't let magical thinking today pervades all our societies. I don't care what religion you want to talk about. I don't care if you want to claim you're complete atheist and have no religion. It's in the cultural fabric. This magical thinking, this desire for these great dramas. Now, this is being used as a skillful device here, not as verbatim truth. It's being used as a device for better understanding. So please keep that in mind. Continuing. While one is practicing the teachings of the Lotus Sutra, one may surmount all kinds of difficulties occasioned by the evil forces of worldly life, or by the persecutions of rulers, non-Buddhists, or the followers of the Hinayana Sutras. And yet one may encounter someone like Tao Cho, Shan Tao, or Honen, priests who seemed thoroughly conversant with the teachings of the provisional and the true Mahayana Sutras, but who were in fact possessed by devils. Such men seem to praise the Lotus Sutra most forcefully, but in fact they belittle the people's capacity to understand it, claiming that its principles are very profound but human understanding is slight. How contradictory is that to the Buddha's very teaching, to Shakyamuni's own words, right? That Buddhahood is inherent. That the Buddha mind is inherent in all sentient and insentient beings. So who are these proponents of the Lotus Sutra to say that we mere humans just can't understand it? What an incredible, incredible insult. And yet, this is what I mean by magical thinking. Oh yeah, it's way beyond us. Come on. Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings were completely pragmatic. They were about you and I. They were about mere mortals. Just how to live life fully, well. So this is what Nichiren's pointing out here. They misled others by saying that, quote, not a single person has ever attained Buddhahood, end quote, which is complete bull. Through that sutra, or that not even one person in 1,000 can be saved by it. Thus, over a period of countless lifetimes, people are deceived as often as there are sands in the Ganges until they abandon their resolute mind of determination in the Lotus Sutra and descend to the teachings of the provisional Mahayana Sutras, abandon these and descend to the teachings of the Hinayana Sutras, and eventually abandon even these and descend to the teachings and scriptures of the non-Buddhist doctrines. I understand all too well now how, in the end, people have come in this way to fall into the evil paths. I, Nichiren, am the only person in all Japan who understands this. But if I utter so much as a word concerning it, then parents, brothers, and teachers will surely censure me, and the ruler of the nation will take steps against me, as is evident several times in his life. On the other hand, I am fully aware that if I do not speak out, I will be lacking in compassion. Not courage, compassion. It's compassion that drives courage, isn't it? Blind courage is just arrogance. Compassionate courage is to help others. I have considered which course to take in the light of the teachings of the Lotus and Nirvana Sutras. If I remain silent, I may escape persecutions in this lifetime, but in my next life I will most certainly fall into the hell of incessant suffering. If I speak out, I am fully aware that I will have to contend with the 3 obstacles and 4 devils, but of these 2 courses, surely the latter is the one to choose. If I were to falter in my determination in the face of persecutions by the sovereign, however, it would be better not to speak out. While thinking this over, I recalled the teachings of the Treasure Tower chapter on the 6 difficult and 9 easy acts. Persons like myself, who are of paltry strength, might still be able to lift Mount Sumeru and toss it about. Persons like myself who are lacking in supernatural powers might still shoulder a load of dry grass and yet remain unburdened in the fire at the end of the kalpa of decline. And persons like myself who are without wisdom might still read and memorize as many sutras as there are sands in the Ganges. But such acts are not difficult, we are told, when compared to the difficulty of embracing even one phrase or verse of the Lotus Sutra in the latter day of the law. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Nevertheless, I vowed to summon up a powerful and unconquerable desire for the salvation of all beings and never falter in my efforts. It is already over 20 years since I began proclaiming my doctrines. Day after day, month after month, year after year, I've been subjected to repeated persecutions. Minor persecutions and annoyances are too numerous even to be counted, but the major persecutions number 4. Among the 4, twice I've been subjected to persecutions by the rulers of the country. The most recent one has come near to costing me my life. In addition, my disciples, my lay supporters, and even those who have merely listened to my teachings have been subjected to severe punishments and treated as though they were guilty of treason. In the 4th volume of the Lotus Sutra, we read, since hatred and jealousy toward this sutra abound even when the thus come one is in the world, how much more will this be so after his passing? The 2nd volume states, if this person should slander a sutra such as this, or on seeing those who read, recite, copy, and uphold this sutra, should despise, hate, envy, or bear grudges against them. And the 5th volume says, the Lotus Sutra, will face much hostility in the world and be difficult to believe, end quote. It also states, quote, there will be many ignorant people who will curse and speak ill of us, and they will address the rulers, high ministers, Brahmins, and householders, as well as the other monks, slandering and speaking evil of us, saying, these men are of perverted views, who preach non-Buddhist doctrines, end quote. It is also stated in the same volume, quote, again and again we will be banished, end quote. And in the 7th volume, quote, some among the group would take sticks of wood or tiles and stones and beat and pelt him, end quote. The Nirvana Sutra records, quote, at that time there were innumerable non-Buddhists who plotted together and went as a group to Ajatashatru and king of Magadha and said, quote, at present there is a man of incomparable wickedness, a monk called Gautama. All sorts of evil people, hoping to gain profit in alms, have flocked to him and become his followers. These people do not practice goodness, but instead use the power of spells and magic to win over men like Mahakashyapa, Shariputra, and Maudaglyana, end quote. Gautama was Shakyamuni Buddha. Tendai says, quote, it will be much worse in the future because the principles of the Lotus Sutra are so hard to teach, end quote. Miao Lo says, quote, hatred refers to those who have not yet freed themselves from impediments, and jealousy to those who take no delight in listening to the doctrines, end quote. The teachers of the 3 schools of the South and 7 schools of the North in China, as well as the countless other scholars of China, all regarded Tendai with resentment and animosity. Thus, Tokuitsu said, quote, see here, Chi, whose disciple are you? With a tongue less than 3 inches long, you slander the teachings that come from the Buddha's long, broad tongue that can cover even his face, end quote. In Tongchun, we read, quote, question, while the Buddha was in the world, there were many who were resentful and jealous. But in the age after his passing, when somebody preaches the Lotus Sutra, why do so many oppose that person? Answer, it is said that good medicine tastes bitter. This sutra, which is like good medicine, dispels attachments to the 5 vehicles and establishes the one ultimate principle. It reproaches those in the ranks of ordinary beings and censures those in the ranks of sagehood, denies provisional Mahayana, and refutes Hinayana. It speaks of the heavenly devils as poisonous insects and calls non-Buddhists demons. It censures those who cling to Hinayana teachings, calling them mean and impoverished, and it dismisses bodhisattvas as beginners in learning. For this reason, heavenly devils hate to listen to it. Non-Buddhists find their ears offended. Persons of the 2 vehicles are dumbfounded. And bodhisattvas flee in terror. That is why all these types of people try to make hindrances for a practitioner of the Lotus Sutra. The Buddha was not speaking nonsense when he declared that hatred and jealousy would abound, end quote. Man, I'd like to make a wall plaque out of that one. A clarification of the precepts states, quote, the superintendents of priests in the capital of Nara say in their memorial to the throne, just as in a land west of China there was a Brahmin named Demon Eloquence, so now is this eastern realm of Japan, there is a shave-pated monk who spits out crafty words. Evil spirits invisibly invite such people to deceive and mislead the world. I, Dengyo, reply to these charges by saying, quote, just as in the Qi dynasty of China, we heard of the arrogant superintendent of priests, Hui Kuang, so now in our own country we see these 6 superintendents of priests. How true was the Buddha's prediction in the Lotus Sutra that the situation would be much worse after his passing, end quote. The outstanding principles of the Lotus Sutra states, quote, speaking of the age, the propagation of the true teaching will begin, in the age when the middle day of the law ends and the latter day opens. Regarding the land, it will be in a land to the east of Tang and to the west of Katsu. As for the people, it will spread among people stained by the 5 impurities who live in a time of conflict. The sutra says, quote, hatred and jealousy toward this sutra abound even when the thus come one is in the world. How much more will it be so after his passing? There is good reason for this statement, end quote. When a little boy is given amoxicillin treatment, he will invariably resent his mother. When a seriously ill person is given good medicine, he will complain without fail about its bitterness. And we meet with similar complaints about the Lotus Sutra, even in the lifetime of the Buddha. How much more severe is the opposition after his passing, especially in the middle and latter days of the law, and in a far-off country like Japan, or for that matter, North America. As mountains pile upon mountains and waves follow waves, so do persecutions add to the persecutions, and criticisms augment criticisms. During the middle day of the law, one man alone, Tendai, understood and expounded the Lotus Sutra and the other sutras. The other Buddhist leaders of both northern and southern China hated him for it, but the two sage rulers of Qian and Sui dynasties gave him an audience so he could establish the correctness of his views in debate with his opponents. Thus, in time, he ceased to have any more opponents. At the end of the middle day of the law, one man alone, Dengyo, grasped the Lotus Sutra and the other sutras just as the Buddha had expounded them. The 7 major temples of Nara rose up like hornets against him. But the 2 worthy sovereigns, Emperor Kamu and Emperor Saga, themselves investigating the views of both sides, made clear which was correct, and thereafter there was no further trouble. It is now over 200 years since the latter day of the law began. The Buddha predicted that conditions would be much worse after his passing, and we see the portents of this in the quarrels and wranglings that go on today because of unreasonable doctrines that are prevalent. And as proof of the fact that we are living in the muddied age, I was not summoned for a doctrinal debate with my opponents, but instead I was sent into exile, my very life imperiled. When it comes to understanding the Lotus Sutra, I have only a minute fraction of the vast ability that Tendai and Dengyo possessed. But as regards my ability to endure persecution and the wealth of my compassion for others, I believe they would hold me in awe. As a votary of the Lotus Sutra, I firmly believe that I should come under the protection of the gods, and yet I do not see the slightest sign of this. On the contrary, I am subjected to increasingly severe punishments. In view of this, am I perhaps not the votary of the Lotus Sutra after all? Or have the heavenly gods and benevolent deities perhaps taken leave and departed from this land of Japan? I find myself in much perplexity. But then I recall the 20 lines of verse in the encouraging devotion chapter of the 5th volume of the Lotus Sutra. If I, Nichiren, had not been born in this land of Japan, then the words of the world-honored one predicting such persecutions would have been a great prevarication, and those 800,000 million Nayutas of Bodhisattvas would have been guilty of the same offense as that of Devadatta, of lying and misleading others. This is, by the way, why Nichiren is our great leader. We are the Bodhisattvas of the earth. The sutra says, quote, there will be many ignorant people who will curse and speak ill of us and will attack us with swords and staves, with rocks and tiles, end quote. Look around you in the world today. Are there any priests other than Nichiren who are cursed and vilified because of a Lotus Sutra or who are attacked with swords and staves? If it were not for Nichiren, the prophecy made by this verse of the sutra would have been sheer falsehood. The same passage, quote, in that evil age there will be monks with perverse wisdom and hearts that are fawning and crooked, end quote. And, quote, they will preach the law to white-robed laymen and will be respected and revered by the world as though they were arhats who possess the 6 transcendental powers, end quote. If it were not for the priests of the Nembutsu, Amida, 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 Zen, and precept schools of our present age, then the world-honored one would have been a teller of great untruths. The passage likewise says, because in the midst of the great assembly they will address the rulers, high ministers, Brahmins, and householders, slandering and speaking evil of us. If the priests of today did not slander me to the authorities and they condemned me to banishment, then this passage in the sutra would have remained unfulfilled. In other words, there's justification that I'm teaching this correctly in the Buddha's true meaning. Quote, again and again he will be banished, says the sutra, but if Nichiren had not been banished time and again for the sake of the Lotus Sutra, what would these words, again and again, have meant? Even Tendai and Dengyo were not able to fulfill this prediction represented by the words again and again, much less was anyone else. But because I have been born in the beginning of the latter day of the law and the age of fear and evil, described in the sutra, I alone have been able to live these words. As other examples of the prophecies that were fulfilled in the Buddha's successor's sutra, it is recorded that the world-honored one said that the 100 years after his passing, a ruler named Ashoka the Great would appear. In the Maya Sutra, he said that 600 years after his passing, a man named Bodhisattva Nagarjuna would appear in southern India. And in the Great Compassion Sutra, he said that 60 years after his passing, a man named Madhyayantika would establish his base in the Dragon Palace. All of these prophecies came true. Indeed, if they had not, who would believe in the Buddha's teachings? Thus the Buddha decided the time when the votary of the Lotus Sutra should appear, describing it as an age of fear and evil. The latter age hereafter. The latter age hereafter, when the law is about to perish, and the latter 500-year period, as attested by the two Chinese versions of the Lotus Sutra of the Correct Law, and the Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law. At such a time, if the three powerful enemies predicted in the Lotus Sutra did not appear, then who would believe in the words of Buddha? If it were not for Nichiren, who could fulfill the Buddha's prophecies concerning the votary of the Lotus Sutra? The 3 schools of the southern China and 7 schools of northern China, along with the 7 major temples of Nara, were numbered among the enemies of the Lotus Sutra in the time of the middle day of the law. How much less can the Zen, precepts, and Nembutsu priests of the present time hope to escape a similar label? We will continue in the next video. I appreciate your attention. If you can support me in any way, my subsistence depends on donations. You don't have to do it, but if you can, go to patreon.com/TLK. Help me out a little bit. Otherwise, please make use of all my videos. Go to threefoldlotus.com and see all of the data that I have posted there. Go to threefoldlotus.com/home/home.htm, and I have a whole list of buttons there with different subjects that or different questions that are often asked of Nichiren Buddhism and Buddhism in general. Make use of the resource. That's my whole purpose here. So thank you so much. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Please take care of yourself. See you next time.